I was very much a sexual adventurer, but making movies or posing for sex magazines. I mean, it was creative. But also going to like the Hellfire Club and spending the week finding the perfect costume. That was a form of performance art. And I started making my own sort of weird brand of porn that was kind of eclectic and arty. So in that sense, I was into art, but really, I was. You make a magazine like you make any magazine, or you make a porn movie like you make any movie. It's the same creative thing. It was all focused around sexual adventures, really. I didn't really move into art till like 1982 or 3, really. I was just following my muse, following my clit around, and ended up meeting a lot of people in the arts. But I wasn't, and I was kind of toying with the idea of being an artist, but I wasn't so involved in the art scene until like '89. But then in the '90s, I transitioned out of the sex industry really into the world of performance art and started making a living full-time as an artist. When I lived in New York, I met some heavy-duty artists and some real heavy-duty academics, but I really wasn't that aware. These were just people that were kind of in the periphery of my world that had an interest in what I was doing. Like sculptor Nancy Grossman, who I visited last week. She's a really amazing artist and sculptor, and her partner, Arlene Raven, was an art critic, and they were really supportive. Or like Alice Neal, the painter, painted me, and she's quite, really famous painter now. And other academics like Richard Schechner, who heads the performance studies at NYU, he found me on 42nd Street, and I was in one of his shows. And so there were these connections with really big artists and really big academics, but I didn't quite know what that meant. I was just a party girl having a good time, and then became more of a sex educator. But eventually, after I made my first one-woman show at the old Harmony Burlesque space, where I actually am performing now, which is really weird, I ended up crossing over, bridging, kind of bringing my experience from the sex industry into the art world. My partner's a professor.
Right.
Yeah. So I started to really think academics were really hot. I just think they're really sexy. And I started finding that people who were really smart were more sexy than people who, are known for their sexiness, like porn stars or strippers or prostitutes. That was like, they were great, but the academics, I started really fetishizing really like smart people. Actually, it's funny, I just went to the Sex Museum, and there's this whole display on sex in film, and there's like 20 TV monitors showing clips from all different kinds of films, and I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I see some picture of me coming on. I'm like, oh, there I am. So I had to I was wondering what it was saying because I was upset. So I went and read it. It said, Dr. Annie Sprinkle. And I thought, and it's showing me from a porn film. I thought, that's really weird, because, it's kind of incongruous. But I kind of like that about it. I mean, I don't look like a porn star anymore, so I don't think people think it's strange. If I still looked like, I did when I was 24. For a long time, what I did didn't change all that much, but the audience and the context changed. So, for example, I was performing on 42nd Street in Times Square at Show World Center. Richard Schechner saw my little show, which was this nurse skit where I show my pussy and show little charts and do a little sex education class. And we put that right in, at the performing garage. And I was doing the same thing, or even showing my cervix. I wouldn't have been allowed to show my cervix at Show World. I would have probably gotten busted. I don't know. But it's the audience and the context. So what I liked to do was bring stuff about sex and porn and the body into kind of serious art context. So the more glamorous and elegant the theater, better. And I toured the world. I went to 16 countries and did my show at really fine theaters. And it's a little ironic being back full circle to the collective unconscious. Interestingly, there's only one person from my childhood before the age of 18 that I ended up reconnecting with, this guy Scott, who ended up going into children's television, and then he ended up going kind of into spirituality and tantra, and I ended up going into spirituality and tantra, and so we were both kind of making these tantric films, tantra themed films, and we went to junior high together. So I went to high school in Panama in Central America, so some of those high school friends I'm still in touch with, but nobody ended up in sex industry. A lot of people ended up seeing the movies and stuff I was doing, but every so often I'll get an email from somebody from, blast from the past, from the 60s or 70s, that finds me on the internet. They were freaked out. But they're very political. They're very much, I grew up very involved in civil rights and equal rights and anti-war and peace activism and international relations, all that. My father was a social worker. And so I grew up to be political. And at 18 years old, I worked briefly in a porn movie theater, got busted, and I had to go as a witness. And I learned right away sex was political. And it still is. So I'm just doing what my parents raised me to do, which is be political, partly. So, and my mom took a women's studies course, and they actually taught about me in the course. And so I think she was very impressed by that. This idea of this sex-positive feminist movement. So I'm kind of brought into that sometimes. In the beginning of the whole so-called porn wars, it was Andrew Jordan and Catherine McKinnon coming along saying, porn is violence towards women and women in porn are victimized. And then we rose up and said, no, we chose this. And then what evolved was a pro-porn feminist, to match the anti-porn feminists. So they really, but we won that war. we won. We definitely won. I mean, it's still going on to some degree, but the beauty is actually, now I'm going to colleges and they'll do like a sex week, and they'll have the pro-porn stands and the anti-porn, the rape and the violence and the abuse of women. So both sides are represented, and there are both sides, and I think we had to learn that from each other. Yeah, there is rape and abuse and exploitation of women, but there's also orgasm and pleasure and women who like making porn, and so we learned from each other. Ever since I was a little kid, I was sitting around my table making some kind of collages or paintings or ceramics. I mean, I have the creative gene. So I always knew I grew up to do something with art since I was 4. So when I got into the sex industry, it was a hell of a surprise. My work is actually studied in universities, so I do a lot of visiting artist lectures and stuff. So there's a lot of academics that know about me and teach stuff about me, which is really cool. I like that. Ooh, there's a policeman on a horse. Cool. That's nice. what I've been kind of interested in is, what happens after porn, after you've had a life that's all geared around, sexually explicit material. What happens after that? Exposed is this show about love, sex, death, and art. It's really the story of two artists in love, and we cover topics like artificial insemination, queers getting married, breast cancer, queer weddings, things like that. So, but basically, Beth and I made a commitment to do art that celebrates, generates, and glorifies love, which is really a challenge because, how much art is there about love? Usually art's about suffering and pain and struggle, or if you're doing art as activism, you show kind of the anger, or you show if you're doing art about war, you show the graphic images of war in your paintings or whatever. We felt like, let's not do that. Let's try to do work about what it is we want to generate more of and go towards. And so we're trying to do art about love that's not too schmaltzy and schlocky and new age or too woo-woo or too hallmarky. And it's a challenge. In a way I feel it's a lot more transgressive to do art about love than art about sex. Sex is pretty easy and people, are intrigued by it. But art about love, people go, it's about love, ew, it sounds hokey. So that's really a challenge. But after having had a fire where I kind of lost everything, and after going through breast cancer and having people leap to my defense in various occasions, I'm so moved by people giving me their love and support that I was like, this is really something very tangible and real, and we can generate more of this in the world rather than have so much hate and violence and anger and prejudice and drama and, oh please, let's go in the other direction. I think it's nice to acknowledge those who come before us, and I really want to acknowledge the people who inspired me along my journey, like Zavira Hollander, Gypsy Rose Lee, Linda Lovelace, my role models. And it's really sweet when young women acknowledge the ones that inspired them, and which Nina Hartley has always been very acknowledging. And but a lot of the young women in the sex industry, they think they're inventing everything, and it's kind of odd. And they don't know the history. And I just think it's important to really value our erotic heritage and be grateful to all those that fought for our freedoms in the gay rights movement, in the sex worker movement, in the fetish movement, for that we can be who we are. It's really important to know the history and to exercise your freedoms that everyone's worked so hard to get. And so something about the history, but I guess I'm feeling nostalgic because I'm back in New York and remembering, kind of things, how it was and where we're at now. I mean, there's sex toy shops on every corner. There's piercing shops. There was none of that. I mean, tattooing was illegal. I had an illegal tattoo parlor in my apartment. Now there's tattooing on every block. And when piercing was seen as just a totally freaky thing, I had the first piercing party in my apartment. So I guess I'm feeling like, wow, I was there at the beginning of that whole body modification thing, but nobody knows the history. None of these folks know the history, and And I think it's really important. The sex museum is important. The books that are coming out about the history. Someone just called and interviewed me about the mine shaft because they found an archive, and there was a picture of me. They tracked me down, and so just like documenting the history. So anyway, I guess
Exactly.
we're making history, new
Right.
history, and I guess uh, and also to encourage the young folks to explore love more. I mean, yeah, it's easy to be edgy and wild and outrageous and sexual, but what about love? And of course, when I was early on, someone said that, I'm like, yeah, yeah, right. But maybe that'll reach one or two people. What is love about, and what does it mean, and when do we need it, and how do we have it, and how can we spread it around the world? I don't know. There seems like there's more pain and suffering and war and violence in the world today than ever. I don't know. Maybe not, but it seems like it. I know. I guess there's always been, but it's gonna, blow the world. The world's gonna blow itself apart. I mean, the pollution. So there's all these huge problems, and how are these young people gonna, you know, help this situation? I think it's worth trying to do something. So, and you know what? It's really nice to be an activist anyway. Whether it helps or not, it's good to do. It's not for everybody anyway. And what else? Visit our websites. Mine's annysprinkle.org, which is kind of the art, sex stuff, and then loveartlab.org. Love Art Lab, if you want to follow that's really what I'm all about now, is the Love Art Lab, and about my work with Beth, and we're documenting all our work and putting it up at the loveartlab.org website. And you're all invited to our weddings. We're going to have the green wedding soon. And we do a wedding every year in a different theme and color. And so we're looking around for our green wedding spot. Women in their 20s are growing up with the things that we weren't even really aware of. They're aware of now. That making porn or beaver could be cool.